Here we go, Kinesiology 223, Chapter 9, still on team dynamics and cohesion. Now we're into presentation 2, talking about group structure, roles, both formal and informal, because you'll have both with any team context. So group structure is a result of the people in a group, and the different people in a group will all have different personalities and wants and needs and things they wish to accomplish for their own selfish reasons, but also things they want and need to accomplish for a team reason. And as a coach, you start to recognize the ones who are the self-serving and the ones who are the selfless on the team, and you get better at kind of utilizing their skill sets. But going back to the book, this is kind of influenced extrinsically by the mission of the group, and I use the word extrinsically kind of loosely there because you have this overall goal and mission of winning games and getting to conference and going to state. But if you're a savvy coach, you find a way to create a mission statement that's inherent to the group itself, so it becomes more intrinsically motivating as opposed to just winning games and going to state. So there's a bit of a adoption process where you have to make it more intrinsically motivating. And leadership is kind of key within this whole process, whether it's the coach or others on the team. Leadership is the driver in that process. And leadership can be the head coach or perhaps a captain on a team or somebody who's kind of like the quiet leader who leads by example. But that structure itself, it's influenced by the social norms, sure, external to the group, but also the social norms that have been cultivated and created within the group structure. There's morals and mores within the group itself. And, you as an athlete, I'm sure if you've ever played a sport, you've gone into a situation where they've had different cultural things in place and you've had to adopt and adapt to those. And, I can tell you, like when I went to UW and I went in there for football, I remember just there was a stretch where we had to walk out past the track, I believe it was, and there's fencing and you walk out to the practice field, and actually you're supposed to jog out to the practice fields, but I had just put some new cleats on the underside of my shoes, and I was kind of walking out along this fence line just to kind of work my shoes in and kind of get accustomed to the new cleats. And one of the backup quarterbacks came by and he stuck his finger in my face mask, and he's like, "We don't walk out here, we jog out here, at least maybe run out to practice." And I'm like, "All right, cool, dude, not a problem." And I just ran the rest of the way out to practice. 'Cause what am I going to do? Push back against that? But that's a great example of how you had somebody who delivered a cultural message, or a message regarding the culture of the organization, the team in this example, to me, who was new and didn't quite understand all the rules or the morals and mores of the group itself. I had to have a little indoctrination regarding the norms of what it's like to play up at UW as opposed to playing at Harper College. Different, right? A little different animal. So for a group to become effective, you got to have two characteristics that have to be developed. And within that, you have roles and group norms. And within roles, you have a set of behaviors expected of the person occupying a position. A person who's a captain of the football team, a quarterback, maybe your safety, a middle linebacker. Those are guys that tend to be the ones that are pressed into leadership roles because of their role on the field. It's just that they're so involved with all the other decision making that happens on the field that they're the ones that end up being called to action as a captain. And you have within these roles, I like what the book does here when they talk about teachers, parents, athletic trainers, corporate executives, health professionals. They all have specific roles within the professions in society, and they shine a light to the fact that it's not all just athletics. You have completely different roles within different organizations, and even within, say, an athletic department, your athletic training department might have different roles, norms, and expectations regarding their people, graduate assistants, student assistants, the other people on staff versus the sports themselves, or even the athletic director to the different coaches on staff. So I really like how they did this. And just like when I was jogging out or walking out to practice, there's a set of behaviors that I was expected to have at a very basal, minimal level. In my role as somebody who transferred in and who's working on making the team, there were no promises. I had to make the team. there were a required set of behaviors that were expected of me within my role. Now, my role changed as I went through the two-a-day practices, and it changed further as we got towards the end of two-a-days. I'll allude to that, I'm sure, somewhere else in another presentation. But, it was very understood and very clear that what my role was and what my behaviors needed to be in that role at that moment to win over people within my team and within my actual group. And the person who was the backup quarterback, he was just kind of enforcing those rules on behalf of the team itself. But, he took it upon himself to deliver that message to me, as I mentioned. And within formal roles, they're within the organization itself, they're very well defined, and there are, within the context of formal roles, you have this kind of like the structure of the organization will dictate the role. And there's expectations, or are expectations associated with that role and the contributions that are supposed to be made, much like me. Walking out to practice, there was a certain kind of expectation I was to follow. And then as my role changed within the team itself, I ended up having a little different experience in terms of how I interacted with the other players and how I ended up asserting myself, all these different things. When you look at electing a captain, the coach needs to really specify what are the behaviors, what are we expecting of somebody to be captain. It's not like we're just anointing you and saying you're a captain. As a captain, we expect you to do this. You have to attend these meetings. You have to be the person who interfaces with the other athletes. We want you to take a leadership role with our freshman team. You have these things that we expect of you, and those things have to be articulated on the front end. So the expected versus the actual contributions, you try to have those be as close as possible. And if you're a good coach, you'll be able to articulate what the expected are, and then your athletes will have a very tight relationship with those to the actual. Now, if you are challenged in being able to articulate that to your athletes, then you're going to have a crevasse, a divide between what is expected and what your athletes in leadership roles actually do. So you as a coach, you have to be very adept at being able to form that vision, articulate that vision, and then enforce that vision, or better yet, more accurately, because you're talking about leaders leading leaders, support that vision and support the behavior with your captains to be able to have a flow through to the other people on the team. It becomes less enforcement and more supporting at that point, because you're more than likely you're going to have individuals who have a greater understanding of leadership. And in the book, on this particular passage in the book, I think it's really important to note how they highlight this in terms of athletes who approached and exceeded their role contribution reported higher levels of task cohesion, meaning common goals. Similarly, when athletes approached or exceeded their social involvement expectations, they reported higher levels of social cohesion. So you set the expectation, you guide your people for success, you show them how to be successful, and then as a result, they know their expectation and they achieve that or even exceed that in terms of their expectation. You'll find that they'll have greater levels of social cohesion and task cohesion. So I like this from the applied perspective. This last line is great. Coaches to find a way to improve the quality of the athletes' roles, such as providing them with some type of meaningful process and meaningful feedback and meaningful interactions with the other athletes. I think that's a wonderful passage in the book. So now if we go back to formal versus informal roles, here we are talking informal. They evolve, within the context between group members. And like in my situation, I went into UW. I wasn't brought in as a leader. I was recruited in. I ended up being like third team when I first walked in. My name was on the board. I was in third team, and then people below me were like freshmen. I came in as a sophomore to junior level player. And, I had to earn my way in, and I ended up earning my way up to the starting rotation. And as a result, because I had worked my way up into the starting rotation, though I wasn't a captain, I had this kind of informal role in terms of how I was working with my other teammates within my group and, the other defensive backs, and kind of working with them, hand fighting techniques, footwork, etc. Things that I had learned in a different environment, playing a little bit faster game at Harper because they were all Division I athletes, and now I'm in a D3 school. And I was able to take these little nuggets of information and implement them in, and there was a value add to our program. And so as a result, I ended up having kind of this informal leadership role And, I had enough football IQ that I was able to carry that okay. And I didn't want to trample on the individuals who were the captains, and one of which was a defensive back, was a starting defensive back. And so to that end, it provided a nice balance because I understood my role and I understood that mine was more of an informal leadership role. And I could still have a positive influence on the environment without undermining the person who is actually the formalized leader within the context of our group. And it's about having some experience, about having the right personality. You have to look at this in terms of having the ability to look at having positive influence versus negative influence and being able to have the ability to implement that incorrectly in the right context to, again, have a positive influence but not undermine others in the group. Now, the book lists 11 different roles. You can go through all of them if you want, but from team player all the way through to cancer. And, you look at some of these individuals and you can kind of just think of some of the people maybe you played with during your time in different sports. And you've had people who are cancerous, people who are kind of like malingerers, the star player, the team player, the person who is the informal leader like I was when I first went in, and I eventually became more of a formalized leader. In my role as a informal leader, it was both verbal and nonverbal. I was able to lead by example. And then also, just like when I was talking with some of the freshman athletes, say, why don't you try this for your hand fighting technique, or try this, or maybe get a little different leverage position when you're standing adjacent or across the line from your receiver to take away a certain route. So, you can, depending on your personality, have the ability to morph into any number of different leadership roles. What you try to do as a coach, let me just go back to that screen. What you try to do as a coach is you try to find the right people, and utilize these different skills as whether they are an actual formal or informal leader. Try to find a way to leverage those skills, and you really try to minimize these two down here. Absolutely. All right, guys, I'm going to cut off from here and move on to the next presentation.